Marcus Reed rushed his aging father into a private hospital, the old man barely able to breathe. With no insurance and no money, Marcus begged for help, but was met with cold refusal and quiet prejudice. As hope faded and his father whispered to go home, a calm young man stepped forward, offering to pay everything. Still, they refused, until one phone call changed everything. Because sometimes, the system only listens when the right voice speaks. This is a story about dignity, courage, and ending discrimination. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. Seattle didn't sleep that night. Rain fell in thin, relentless sheets, tapping against cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights. Cold wind slipped through narrow alleys, carrying the distant hum of traffic and the quiet weight of a city that had seen too much and cared too little. Inside a small, aging apartment on the edge of the city, Marcus Reed was counting coins under a dim yellow lamp. Marcus Reed was 34, tall with a strong, broad-shouldered build shaped by years of construction work. His dark brown skin carried faint scars along his forearms, small reminders of long days and heavy labor. His hair was cut short, practical, slightly uneven as if he had done it himself. His eyes, deep brown, tired, always observant, held a quiet kind of endurance. Marcus wasn't loud, wasn't confrontational. He was the kind of man who endured things silently, who carried burdens without asking for help. Life had taught him early that complaining didn't change outcomes. Tonight, though, something in his hands trembled. 3 quarters, 2 dimes, a few pennies. That was everything. He exhaled slowly, staring at the small pile like it might magically multiply. On the table beside him lay a nearly empty strip of medication. Only 2 pills left. He picked it up, turning it between his fingers. Behind him, a harsh, broken sound cut through the room. A cough. Then another. Marcus turned instantly. Elijah? On the old, worn-out couch lay Elijah Reed, his father. Elijah was 72, though hardship had aged him far beyond that. His once strong frame had thinned into fragile lines, shoulders slightly sunken, chest rising unevenly with each breath. His skin, deep brown like Marcus's, was marked with wrinkles that told stories of decades of labor. His hair was short and gray, thin in patches. His face, long, narrow with high cheekbones, still held dignity, even now. But his eyes were tired. Not just from illness, but from years of fighting a life that never quite gave back. Elijah had once been a factory worker, strong, reliable, the kind of man people trusted. But years of inhaling dust and chemicals had left his lungs scarred. The diagnosis came too late. Treatment was expensive. Insurance had long disappeared when the factory shut down. Since then, survival had become a day-by-day negotiation. Marcus, Elijah whispered, his voice dry and strained. It's happening again. Marcus was already beside him. I know. Breathe slow, okay? Just like before. But this time was different. Elijah's chest heaved harder. His breath came in shallow, uneven bursts, like his body had forgotten the rhythm of breathing. Marcus reached for the medication strip, hesitated, only 2 left. He swallowed. Here, he said, pressing 1 pill into his father's hand. Take it. Elijah looked at it for a moment, then at Marcus. You need to save them, he murmured. Marcus forced a small smile. I'll find more tomorrow. That was a lie. They both knew it. Elijah swallowed the pill anyway. For a moment, silence. Then, the coughing returned, sharper, deeper. Elijah's hand gripped Marcus's sleeve, weak but desperate. I can't breathe. That was the moment Marcus felt it. Fear. Not the quiet kind he was used to. Not the kind you carry and manage. This was sharp. Immediate. Unforgiving. Marcus stood up so fast the chair behind him scraped loudly against the floor. We're going to the hospital, he said. Elijah shook his head faintly. No money. I don't care. No insurance. I don't care. Marcus's voice cracked just once. That was all. He grabbed his jacket, a faded, worn-out thing that had seen too many winters, and carefully lifted his father. Elijah was lighter than he should have been. The thought alone made Marcus's chest tighten. Rain hit them the moment they stepped outside, cold, sharp, unforgiving. Marcus pulled the hood over his head, shielding his father as best as he could. The street was nearly empty, just the occasional car passing by, headlights slicing through the darkness. No taxis, no rides, just distance. Marcus adjusted his grip and started walking. Each step felt heavier than the last. "Stay with me, okay?" he said quietly. "We're almost there." That wasn't true either, but he kept walking. A block later, a faint glow appeared ahead, a bus stop. And, as if the night had decided to offer him one small mercy, a bus approached. Marcus stepped forward, raising his hand. The bus hissed as it stopped. The doors opened. Inside sat a handful of passengers. One of them, a middle-aged woman named Sharon Miller, glanced up briefly. Sharon was in her late 40s, pale-skinned, with short blonde hair tucked neatly behind her ears. She wore a clean office coat, her posture straight, her expression tired but composed. She was the type of person who valued order, routine, and personal space. Years of working in corporate environments had made her guarded, cautious around anything unfamiliar or uncomfortable. Her nose wrinkled slightly as Marcus stepped in, soaked from the rain, carrying his father. Marcus didn't notice. He was too focused. "Please," he said to the driver, breath uneven. "I need to get to St. Mary's Hospital." The driver nodded once. "Get on." The bus driver, Thomas Hale, was a man in his early 50s, tall, with a slightly heavy build, graying hair, and tired blue eyes. His face carried the quiet patience of someone who had spent decades watching people come and go. He wasn't a man of many words, but there was something steady about him, something kind, even if life had worn him down. Marcus moved quickly to the nearest seat and gently lowered his father. Elijah leaned against him, still struggling. The bus started moving again. Rain streaked across the windows. Inside, the air was warm, but tense. Sharon shifted slightly in her seat, glancing again at Marcus and Elijah. There was a faint smell of damp clothes, of rain-soaked fabric, and long days without comfort. She turned her face away, pulling her coat closer. Marcus noticed this time, just for a second. Then he looked back at his father. "Hey, stay with me," he whispered. Elijah's eyes fluttered. "I'm tired." "No," Marcus said quickly. "Not yet, you're not." At the front, Thomas watched them through the rearview mirror. His grip tightened slightly on the wheel. He had seen things like this before. People on the edge, people with nowhere else to go. He couldn't stop the system, but he could drive a little faster. Without saying anything, he pressed the gas just a bit more. The engine hummed louder. Outside, the city blurred into streaks of light and shadow. Inside, time stretched. Marcus held his father's hand, his thumb brushing gently over the back of it. He remembered something suddenly. Long time ago, he had been the one struggling to breathe, just a kid with a bad flu. And Elijah had stayed up all night beside him, whispering the same words Marcus now whispered. "Breathe, son. I'm right here." Marcus swallowed hard. "I'm right here, Dad," he said. Elijah didn't respond. For a moment, just a moment, Marcus thought, "No." Elijah's chest rose again. Shallow, but still there. The bus rolled through another intersection. "Closer now." "Almost there." Marcus tightened his hold. "Just a little longer," he said. And for the first time that night, he wasn't sure who he was saying it to. The bus slowed with a long, metallic hiss, tires grinding gently against the wet pavement as it pulled up in front of St. Mary's Medical Center. The building stood tall and sterile under the rain, its glass facade glowing with cold, artificial light. It looked clean. It looked safe. It looked like the kind of place where people were supposed to be saved. Marcus didn't wait for the bus to fully stop before rising. "Thank you," he muttered quickly to the driver, his voice strained, barely audible. Thomas Hale gave a small nod, his tired eyes lingering on Marcus for half a second longer than usual, like he wanted to say something, anything, but the moment passed. Marcus stepped off the bus, the rain hitting his face again as he adjusted his grip around his father. Elijah felt heavier now, not physically, but in a way Marcus couldn't explain. The automatic doors of the hospital slid open with a soft mechanical sound. Warm air rushed out, carrying the faint scent of antiseptic and polished floors. Inside, everything was bright. Too bright. Marcus hurried toward the reception desk, his boots leaving faint, wet prints behind him. Elijah's breathing was worse now. Short, uneven gasps that sounded like they were being pulled from somewhere deep and unwilling. "Please," Marcus said as he reached the counter. "He can't breathe. I need help." Behind the desk sat Claire Whitfield. Claire was in her early 30s, slim, with pale skin and sharp, defined features. Her blonde hair was tied back neatly in a tight bun, not a single strand out of place. Her posture was straight, almost rigid, and her uniform looked freshly pressed. She was the kind of person who valued control, over her environment, over people, over situations. Years in the hospital system had shaped her into someone efficient, precise, and distant. She didn't like complications. She didn't like mess. And right now, Marcus and Elijah looked like both. Her eyes flicked up briefly, scanning them in a single glance. Wet clothes, worn shoes, the faint smell of damp fabric and exhaustion. Her expression didn't change much, but something in her gaze hardened. "Insurance card?" she asked flatly. Marcus blinked. "What?" "Do you have insurance?" Claire repeated, her tone slightly sharper, as if she were asking something obvious. "He can't breathe," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Please, just call someone." Claire didn't move. "I need your insurance information first," she said. Marcus's grip tightened around his father. "We don't have time for that." Behind them, the automatic doors opened again. A man in his mid-50s walked in, supporting a younger woman by the arm. The man, Richard Coleman, was tall, broad, wearing an expensive wool coat that still held its shape despite the rain. His hair was silver at the temples, neatly combed. His face carried authority, the kind that came from years of being listened to. The woman beside him, Emily Coleman, was in her late 20s, petite, with fair skin and delicate features. Her long brown hair was damp from the rain, and she looked pale, slightly disoriented, but not in immediate danger. Richard approached the desk with quiet urgency. "My daughter's feeling dizzy. I need someone to check her." Claire's posture shifted immediately. "Of course, sir," she said, her tone softening. "Do you have your insurance card?" Richard handed it over without hesitation. Claire glanced at it, nodded, and pressed a button behind the desk. "Someone will be with you shortly," she said with a polite smile. Marcus stared. The contrast was immediate, effortless. He stepped forward again. "Please," he said, his voice breaking slightly now. "My father, he can't breathe." Claire exhaled slowly like she was being inconvenienced. "Sir, without insurance or a form of payment, we cannot proceed with treatment." Marcus shook his head. "I'll pay later. I'll find a way. Just help him now." "That's not how this works." Elijah shifted weakly in Marcus's arms. "Marcus," he whispered, barely audible. "It's okay." "No, it's not," Marcus said quickly, leaning closer. "You're not okay." Elijah's hand found Marcus's sleeve again, his grip faint, but present. "Let's go home." The words hit harder than anything else. Marcus looked up again, desperation now fully visible in his eyes. "Please," he said, louder this time. "He's dying!" Claire's expression tightened. For a brief moment, just a flicker. Something almost like discomfort passed across her face. But it disappeared just as quickly. "I'm sorry," she said, though her tone carried no warmth. "You need to go to a public hospital." Marcus followed her gaze for a moment, and that's when he saw it. On the wall behind her, in clean, bold letters, "Care for everyone." The words felt like a joke, a cruel one. Marcus let out a short, hollow breath. Behind him, a nurse walked past. Young, maybe in her early 20s. Her name tag read Lily Tran. Lily was small, with soft features and dark hair tied loosely at the back. Her movements were quick but slightly uncertain, like she was still learning her place in this environment. She slowed for just a second when she saw Marcus and Elijah. Her eyes lingered. Concern, real, visible concern. But then she looked toward Claire and kept walking. Marcus noticed, of course he did. Everyone noticed, no one acted. The waiting area remained quiet. Too quiet. Emily Coleman was already being guided toward a treatment room by another nurse. Richard followed closely behind, not once looking back. Marcus stood there, soaked, exhausted, holding his father like he was the only thing left in the world. "Elijah," he said softly, "stay with me." Elijah's breathing grew weaker. Each breath seemed to take more effort than the last. Marcus looked back at Claire one more time. "This place is supposed to help people," he said quietly. Claire didn't respond, because for her, this wasn't about people. It was about policy. Marcus lowered his head for a moment, his jaw tightening. He adjusted his grip again, preparing to turn. To leave. Because what else was there? Elijah's voice came again, softer now. Home. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Rain still fell outside, cold, unforgiving, just like everything else. And behind him, the words on the wall remained unchanged. Care for everyone. The fluorescent lights above hummed faintly, casting a cold, unforgiving glow across the emergency lobby. Everything felt too clean, too controlled, like a place where suffering had to follow rules before it could be acknowledged. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, Elijah trembling in his arms, the words, "Let's go home," still echoing in his ears. But something inside him refused to move. Not yet, not like this. He turned back. "Please," Marcus said again, his voice lower now, raw from holding back too much. "There has to be someone, a doctor, anyone." Claire hesitated this time, not out of empathy, but because persistence like this was inconvenient. She exhaled quietly and reached for the phone. "I'll call the attending physician," she said, her tone flat, as if this was already more than she wanted to do. Minutes later, the sound of measured footsteps approached from the hallway beyond the double doors. Doctor. Linda Harper stepped into view. Dr. Harper was a woman in her early 50s, tall, with a slender, almost rigid frame. Her silver blonde hair was cut neatly to shoulder length, styled in a way that suggested precision and control. Her face was sharp, defined by high cheekbones and a narrow jawline. Her pale green eyes carried intelligence, but also distance. She had built her reputation over decades, efficient, decisive, respected. But somewhere along the way, compassion had become optional in her world. Years of pressure, lawsuits, and administrative politics had reshaped her into someone who trusted systems more than people. She looked at Marcus and Elijah the way someone might assess a problem, not a person. "What seems to be the issue?" she asked. Marcus stepped forward quickly. "My father, he can't breathe. He needs help now." Dr. Harper's eyes moved over Elijah briefly, clinically. "How long has he had this condition?" "Years," Marcus said, "but it's worse tonight. Please." "Does he have insurance?" The question landed like a wall. Marcus stared at her. "No, but I'll pay. I swear I'll find a way." Dr. Harper didn't react. "I'm sorry," she said, her tone composed, almost rehearsed. "We cannot admit or treat patients without proper documentation or financial clearance." Marcus felt something collapse inside his chest. "He's dying," Marcus said, louder now. "Can't you see that?" Dr. Harper's expression didn't change. We have protocols for a reason. Protocols. The word echoed louder than anything else. Marcus looked down at his father. Elijah's breathing was thinner now, each inhale shallow, each exhale fragile. "Dad," Marcus whispered. Elijah turned his head slightly, his eyes barely open, and somehow, despite everything, he smiled. It was weak, fading, but it was there. "Hey," Elijah murmured. "You did good." Marcus shook his head immediately. "No, don't say that. You're going to be okay." Elijah's hand lifted slowly, resting against Marcus's arm. "Listen," he whispered, "no matter what." "You don't—" His breath caught. Marcus leaned closer. "What?" Elijah forced the words out, each one heavier than the last. "Don't kneel for anyone." The words struck something deep. A memory. Marcus was 8 years old again, standing in a dusty backyard, his knees scraped from falling. He had looked up at his father back then. Tears in his eyes, frustration burning inside him. Elijah had crouched down in front of him, not above him. "You stand," Elijah had said gently. "No matter who's in front of you. You stand. The moment you kneel, they stop seeing you as equal." Marcus had never forgotten that, until now, because in this moment, nothing felt equal. Marcus looked back up at Dr. Harper, at Claire, at the clean floors, the white lights, the system, and slowly, painfully, he lowered himself. His knees hit the polished tile with a quiet, hollow sound. The entire lobby seemed to pause. "I'm begging you," Marcus said. His voice broke. Not loud, not dramatic, just broken. "Please, save him." For a second, just a second, the world held its breath. Then, "Sir, you need to stand up." The voice came from behind him. A security guard had approached. His name was Derek Collins, a man in his late 40s with a stocky build and a broad chest that filled out his uniform. His skin was light brown, his head shaved clean, his expression firm but not unkind. Derek had spent years working in places like this, learning how to manage conflict without escalating it. He believed in rules, but he also understood people. And right now, he looked uncomfortable. "You can't cause a disturbance here," Derek said, his tone controlled. "Please stand up." Marcus didn't move. "He's not causing a disturbance," a quiet voice whispered from across the room. It was Lily Tran. She stood near the hallway entrance, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her eyes were fixed on Marcus, her expression tense. She looked like she wanted to step forward, but something held her back. Fear. Uncertainty. The invisible weight of hierarchy. Dr. Harper glanced at her briefly. That was enough. Lily lowered her gaze. Silence returned. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as they gripped his father's jacket. "I don't have anything else," he said quietly. "No money, no insurance, no one to call, just him." Dr. Harper's voice came again, colder now. "That doesn't change the policy." Marcus closed his eyes. For a moment, everything inside him screamed to stand up, to walk out, to hold on to that last piece of dignity his father had taught him. But then Elijah's breathing hitched again, sharp, fragile, and Marcus stayed where he was, because dignity didn't matter if his father stopped breathing. Elijah's fingers tightened weakly around Marcus's sleeve. "Marcus," he whispered again. Marcus leaned closer instantly. "I'm here." Elijah's lips moved slightly. "Home." The word was barely there. Marcus swallowed hard. He opened his eyes, looked up one last time, at Dr. Harper, at Claire, at the system that refused to see him. And in that moment, under the cold white light, Marcus understood something he had never wanted to believe. Sometimes, doing everything right still wasn't enough. The silence after Marcus's plea didn't feel like quiet. It felt like rejection settling into the walls. The fluorescent lights still buzzed overhead, indifferent, unchanging. Marcus remained on his knees, Elijah's weight pressing against him, fragile and fading. No one moved. No one stepped forward. Except someone had been watching. Near the far corner of the lobby, partially shadowed by a tall indoor plant and a row of empty chairs, stood a young man who hadn't said a word since Marcus entered. Daniel Brooks. Daniel was in his early 30s, around the same age as Marcus, but carried himself differently. He stood at an average height, lean build, with a quiet kind of strength, not physical but controlled. His skin was deep brown, smooth, his features sharp but calm. His hair was short, neatly trimmed. He wore simple clothes, a dark coat, clean but not expensive, a plain shirt underneath. Nothing about him stood out at first glance, except his eyes. They were steady, observant, and thoughtful. The kind of eyes that noticed everything and reacted to very little. He had been there from the beginning. From the moment Marcus walked through the doors, soaked in rain. From the first word exchanged at the reception desk. From the moment Marcus dropped to his knees, Daniel hadn't interrupted. He had just watched. Because he understood something most people in that room didn't. Sometimes, you learn more by watching how a system treats the powerless than by listening to what it claims to stand for. A staff member standing near the hallway, a nurse named Karen Doyle, leaned slightly toward another employee and whispered under her breath, "He doesn't look like he belongs here." Karen was in her late 30s, slightly overweight, with tired eyes and a permanent crease between her brows. Years of working double shifts had made her practical, efficient, but also quietly judgmental. She had learned to categorize people quickly. It made her job easier. And Daniel, standing silently in the corner, didn't fit neatly into any category she liked. Daniel heard her. He didn't react. Instead, he stepped forward. Slowly, calmly. His shoes made a soft sound against the polished floor as he approached the center of the room. His presence wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, but it shifted something, just enough for people to notice. Marcus didn't look up at first. He was too focused on Elijah, but Daniel stopped just a few feet away. "Excuse me," Daniel said, his voice even, controlled. Dr. Harper turned slightly, her expression already carrying the faint irritation of someone who expected another inconvenience. "Yes?" Daniel gestured gently toward Marcus and Elijah. "This man needs immediate medical attention," he said. "His breathing is unstable, likely acute respiratory distress. Waiting will only make it worse." His tone wasn't emotional. It was precise. Clinical. Dr. Harper studied him for a second. "And you are?" she asked. "Someone who can cover the cost," Daniel replied. That made Claire look up. So did Karen. Even Derek, the security guard, shifted slightly. Daniel continued, "I'll take full financial responsibility for his treatment, whatever it costs." Marcus finally looked up. Confusion, shock, disbelief. "Sir," Marcus started, his voice weak, "you don't." Daniel raised a hand slightly, not dismissing him, but steadying the moment. "It's okay," he said quietly. Dr. Harper's expression didn't soften. Instead, it sharpened. "That's not how this works," she said. Daniel didn't blink. "Then explain how it does work." There was a subtle shift in the room now, because Daniel wasn't pleading. He was questioning. Dr. Harper folded her arms slightly. "We require proper documentation, insurance verification, financial clearance. This is standard procedure." Daniel nodded once, as if acknowledging the statement. "And in cases where a patient's life is at risk?" he asked. Dr. Harper hesitated, just briefly. "We still follow protocol." Daniel's eyes flicked to Elijah. The man's breathing was worse now, shallower, fading. Then back to Dr. Harper. "So protocol outweighs immediate medical need?" he asked. There was no aggression in his tone. That made it harder to ignore. Dr. Harper's jaw tightened slightly. "We are not refusing care. We are redirecting him to an appropriate facility." Marcus let out a hollow laugh. "Appropriate," he repeated under his breath. Daniel didn't respond to that. Instead, he stepped a little closer. "Let me simplify this," he said calmly. "A man is dying. I am offering to pay for his treatment. There is no legal or financial barrier left, and yet you are still refusing." The words landed heavier than Marcus's plea had, because they weren't emotional. They were logical, and logic is harder to dismiss. Karen shifted uncomfortably. Lily, standing near the hallway, looked up again, this time with something closer to hope. Derek glanced between Daniel and Dr. Harper, sensing something changing. But Dr. Harper held her ground. Her voice, when it came, was colder. "This is not a discussion," she said. "It's policy." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slightly. "I see," he said, but there was something different now, something beneath the calm, because Daniel wasn't surprised. He had expected this. He had watched it unfold, every second of it. Marcus's shoulders slumped slightly, whatever fragile hope had appeared now slipping away again. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly to Daniel, his voice heavy, "but it's no use." Elijah's hand shifted weakly. "Marcus," he whispered. Marcus leaned down instantly. "I'm here." Elijah's eyes barely opened. "Good man," he murmured, though it wasn't clear who he meant. Marcus swallowed hard. Daniel looked at both of them, and for the first time, something changed in his expression. Not anger, not frustration. Something deeper. Recognition, because he had seen this before, a long time ago, in a different place, with someone he couldn't save. Daniel straightened slightly. His calm didn't disappear, but it sharpened. "All right," he said quietly. Dr. Harper watched him carefully. "What does that mean?" she asked. Daniel met her gaze. "It means," he said, "I understand your position." But his tone suggested something else entirely. The room fell silent again, the kind of silence that comes right before something shifts. Marcus didn't know what was happening. He only knew time was running out, and Elijah's breathing was getting weaker. The white lights above remained unchanged, cold, unforgiving, and the system still stood exactly where it had been from the start, unmoved. The silence that followed Daniel's last words didn't feel empty anymore. It felt suspended, like something unseen had just been set into motion. Marcus remained kneeling on the polished floor, Elijah barely conscious in his arms, his breathing now so faint it seemed to disappear between seconds. The fluorescent lights above still hummed, but the air had changed. Not warmer, not kinder. Just different. Daniel reached slowly into his coat pocket. No one stopped him. No one spoke. He pulled out a phone. Simple, black, unremarkable. The kind of device that didn't draw attention yet somehow held it now. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. He glanced once at Elijah, then at Marcus, then lifted the phone to his ear. "Yeah," Daniel said calmly when the call connected. "I'm in the emergency department, St. Mary Cess." His voice didn't rise. It didn't carry authority in the obvious sense, but it didn't need to. "I need you to note this," he continued. "Attending physician, Dr. Linda Harper. ER intake refusing emergency care to a patient in acute respiratory distress." Claire's fingers froze over the keyboard. Karen stopped whispering. Even Derek straightened slightly. Daniel's gaze didn't leave Dr. Harper. "Time of refusal," he added, glancing briefly at the wall clock. 11:42 p.m. The seconds stretched. Dr. Harper's expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough. The controlled composure she carried so carefully began to tighten at the edges. Daniel paused, listening. Then he spoke again, just as evenly. "Yes, I'll wait." He lowered the phone slightly, but didn't hang up. Marcus stared at him, confusion clouding his face. What are you doing?" he asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer immediately. "Fixing something," he said after a moment. Marcus didn't understand. How could a phone call fix this? Nothing had worked so far, not pleading, not logic, not dignity. So how could something so simple? A sudden vibration cut through the stillness. Dr. Harper's phone, the sound was sharp, immediate, out of place in the quiet room. She looked down at it. For a fraction of a second, she didn't move. Then she answered. Yes? Her tone was still controlled, but there was something beneath it now, something tighter. She listened, and slowly, her face changed, not completely, but enough. The color in her cheeks faded slightly. The firmness in her jaw shifted into something less certain. I see, she said. Another pause. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Daniel, then away. Yes, she repeated, understood. She ended the call. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Claire looked at her, uncertainty creeping into her expression for the first time. Dr. Harper? She asked softly. Dr. Harper didn't respond right away. Instead, she adjusted her posture slightly, as if trying to regain control of something that had slipped just out of reach. Before she could speak, the doors behind the hallway swung open. Fast. A man hurried into the emergency department, his footsteps quick, almost urgent. This was Michael Reynolds. Michael was in his mid-40s, tall, slightly overweight, with thinning brown hair and glasses that kept sliding down the bridge of his nose. His suit was slightly wrinkled, tie loosened, as if he had rushed out of somewhere more comfortable to be here. But what stood out wasn't his appearance. It was his energy, alert, focused, slightly anxious. The kind of man used to managing situations before they escalated. Where is he? Michael asked, his voice low but sharp. His eyes scanned the room quickly. They landed on Daniel, and in that moment, everything about his posture changed. He straightened immediately. Sir, Michael said, walking toward him. The word didn't go unnoticed, not by Claire, not by Karen, not by Derek, and definitely not by Marcus. Because up until now, no one had called Daniel anything like that. Daniel lowered his phone. You got here fast, he said calmly. Michael nodded quickly. I was nearby. His eyes moved briefly to Marcus and Elijah, taking in the situation in seconds, then to Dr. Harper, then back to Daniel. This is the case, he asked quietly. Daniel didn't answer with words. He didn't need to. Michael exhaled slowly. Behind them, whispers began to spread, soft at first, then growing. Who is he? Karen murmured under her breath. I don't know, Claire replied, her voice tight. But something's not right. Lily, standing near the hallway, didn't speak, but her eyes were wide now, because she felt it too. The shift, the invisible line that had just been crossed. Doctor. Harper stepped forward slightly, trying to reclaim the moment. Mr. Reynolds, she said, her tone measured. This situation is being handled according to hospital protocol. Michael cut her off. Protocol can wait, he said. Not loudly, but firmly. Dr. Harper stopped. That didn't happen often. Get a team ready, Michael continued, glancing toward the hallway. Now. No one moved, because no one had said it clearly. Not yet. Claire looked between them, uncertain. Doctor. Harper hesitated just for a second. But in that second, everything was decided, because hesitation, here, meant loss of control. Marcus watched all of this like it was happening somewhere far away. He didn't understand the words, the roles, the hierarchy. He only understood one thing. Something had changed. And for the first time since stepping into this building, he wasn't being ignored. Elijah shifted weakly in his arms, still breathing, still fighting. Marcus looked at Daniel again. Who are you? He asked quietly. Daniel met his eyes. For a moment there was no answer, just a calm, steady gaze. Then, that doesn't matter right now, Daniel said, but everything in the room suggested otherwise. The whispers grew louder. The new one. Is that him? No way. I heard he was coming this week. Karen's voice dropped even lower. That's him, isn't it? Claire didn't respond. She didn't need to, because she was starting to understand. And understanding came with something else. Fear, not loud, not visible, but there. Dr. Harper stood still, her hands at her sides. The control she had held so tightly now felt unstable. Not gone, but threatened. And Daniel, he hadn't raised his voice once, hadn't argued, hadn't begged. He had simply made a call, and now the system was beginning to respond. The tension in the emergency lobby no longer felt uncertain. It felt exposed. What had been quiet indifference minutes ago had shifted into something sharper, more fragile. Every movement, every glance now carried weight. Marcus was still on his knees, Elijah barely conscious against him, but for the first time since entering the hospital, the world around him was no longer ignoring his existence. Michael Reynolds stood beside Daniel, his posture straight, his voice lowered but firm. "The team is on standby," he said. "They're waiting for your directive." That sentence alone changed everything. Not suggestion, not request. Directive. Claire's fingers hovered uselessly above the keyboard. Karen had stopped whispering entirely. Derek, the security guard, stepped back half a pace, as if instinctively making room for something he didn't fully understand but recognized as authority. Marcus looked from one face to another, his mind struggling to catch up. "What is happening?" he asked quietly, almost to himself. Daniel finally turned fully toward him. For a moment he didn't speak. He simply looked at Marcus, not as a problem, not as a case, but as a man. Then he said, calmly, clearly, "My name is Daniel Brooks." The name meant nothing to Marcus, but to everyone else in the room, it meant everything. Michael took a step back, giving Daniel space, not out of fear, but respect. "Sir," he said, just loud enough for others to hear, "do you want me to proceed?" That was the moment. The invisible line broke. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't change his tone. But when he spoke again, the entire room listened differently. "I was appointed deputy director of this hospital," he said, "effective today." Silence, not the empty kind, the kind that presses down on everything. Claire's face lost color completely. Karen's eyes widened. Lily, standing near the hallway, brought her hand to her mouth, her breath catching as if she had been holding it for too long. Marcus blinked. Once. Twice. He didn't fully understand the title, but he understood the shift. Dr. Harper stood perfectly still. Her expression didn't collapse. It tightened. Because now, this wasn't about policy anymore, it was about accountability. Daniel continued, still calm, still precise. "And the first thing I've witnessed in this position is a patient in critical condition being refused emergency care." No accusation, no raised voice, just fact. Dr. Harper stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Brooks," she said, her tone controlled but thinner now. "You need to understand that we were following established protocols." Daniel cut in, not loudly but firmly enough that the interruption couldn't be ignored. "I understand exactly what I'm looking at." The words landed harder than anything before, because they weren't emotional. They were final. Marcus tightened his hold around Elijah, his heart pounding. Not from fear anymore, but something unfamiliar. Possibility. Daniel's gaze shifted briefly, not to the staff, but to Elijah. The old man's breathing was dangerously shallow now, his chest barely rising. Then Daniel looked back at Dr. Harper. "In emergency medicine," he said quietly, "there's a principle that comes before paperwork, before policy, before liability." He paused. No one moved. "You treat first." The words echoed through the room. Simple, unarguable. Dr. Harper opened her mouth, then closed it, because there was no counter-argument that didn't sound hollow. Daniel turned slightly toward Michael. "Document everything," he said, from the moment they walked in. Michael nodded immediately. "Already in progress." Daniel gave a small nod, then looked back at Dr. Harper. "Effective immediately," he said. "You are relieved of your duties pending internal review." The sentence was calm, measured, but it struck like impact. Claire inhaled sharply. Karen looked down at the floor. Derek's expression shifted. Not surprised, but confirmed, as if something he had suspected had finally been spoken aloud. Dr. Harper didn't react right away. That was what made it heavier. She stood there, posture still straight, hands at her sides, as if refusing to let the moment show on her face. But something had changed. Something irreversible. "I have served this hospital for over 20 years, she said finally, her voice quieter now. Daniel nodded once. "And today, you failed a patient who needed you." There was no anger in his tone. That made it worse, because anger can be argued with. Truth cannot. Dr. Harper didn't respond again. She simply turned and walked away. Not rushed, not broken, but no longer in control. The sound of her footsteps faded into the hallway. And with it, something shifted in the room. Lily let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Then suddenly, she cried. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just quietly. Her shoulders trembling slightly as tears slipped down her face. Relief. That was what it was. Relief that someone had finally said what she had felt, but never dared to act on. Karen glanced at her, uncomfortable. Claire looked away, because relief in a place like this was dangerous. It meant something had been wrong all along. Marcus watched all of this, still kneeling, still holding his father. But now, he looked at Daniel differently, not as a stranger, not as a miracle, but as someone who had seen this before. "Why?" Marcus asked quietly. "Why did you help us?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. For the first time, his composure shifted, not outwardly, but in the smallest way. His gaze softened. He looked down at Elijah, then, slowly he spoke. "I grew up in a place not very different from yours," he said. "Small apartment, not enough money, always choosing between food and medicine." Marcus listened, because now, this wasn't about the hospital. This was about something deeper. Daniel continued, his voice still steady, but carrying something heavier now. "My mother—" He paused briefly, not because he didn't know the words, but because he had lived them too many times. "She needed help one night, couldn't breathe, just like him." Marcus's grip tightened. Daniel's eyes didn't move. "We went to a hospital," he said. "They asked for insurance, for paperwork, for time we didn't have." The room was silent again, but this silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was listening. "They told us to go somewhere else," Daniel said, a beat. "She didn't make it. No one spoke, not Claire, not Karen, not even Michael, because there was nothing to say." Daniel inhaled slowly, then exhaled. And just like that, the moment passed. His voice returned to what it had been. Controlled. Calm. But now everyone in the room understood something they hadn't before. This wasn't just authority, this was memory. Daniel looked back at Marcus. "I won't let that happen again," he said, not loudly, not dramatically, but with certainty. Marcus nodded slowly. He didn't trust words anymore, but this felt real. Behind them, the emergency room doors remained closed. But the system inside had already begun to change. The emergency doors burst open with urgency that no longer needed permission. "Move now!" a voice called from inside. A team rushed out, fast, focused, no hesitation this time. At the front was Dr. Samuel Grant, a man in his early 40s with a solid build, dark skin slightly lighter than Marcus's, and a calm intensity in his eyes. His hair was closely shaved, his jaw clean and firm, his movements precise without wasted motion. Samuel had built his reputation quietly over years, never the loudest, never the most visible, but always the one who stayed when things got difficult. He believed in medicine the way others believed in faith. Behind him, 2 nurses followed. One of them was Lily Tran. Her steps were faster now, no longer hesitant. Her eyes were focused, her earlier fear replaced with something stronger: purpose. Her small frame moved with surprising steadiness as she prepared equipment. "On the bed," Samuel said quickly. Marcus didn't hesitate. For the first time that night, someone had said what to do and meant it. He carefully laid Elijah onto the rolling gurney. "Elijah Reed, 72, respiratory distress," Daniel said calmly, already stepping beside them. His voice carried clarity, efficiency. "Condition worsening for at least 30 minutes without intervention." Samuel nodded once. "Got it." The team moved, oxygen mask, monitors, rapid assessment. The room that had once rejected Elijah now worked around him with urgency. Marcus stepped back, his hands trembling, not from fear now, but from release. He didn't know where to stand, what to do, so he just watched. Watched as his father's chest rose again, this time with help. Watched as numbers appeared on screens, as voices exchanged information quickly, professionally. Watched as life was no longer being denied. Daniel stood beside him, quiet again, not observing anymore, ensuring. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Marcus couldn't tell. "Stay with me, sir," Samuel said, his voice steady as he adjusted the oxygen flow. "You're going to be okay." Elijah's eyes fluttered. For the first time in what felt like forever, his breathing began to stabilize, still weak. But there, real. Marcus covered his mouth with his hand, his shoulders shaking once, just once, as something inside him finally gave way. Hope. They moved Elijah through the double doors. This time, no one stopped them. Hours later, the hospital felt different, quieter. Not because less was happening, but because something had shifted beneath the surface. Marcus sat beside a hospital bed in a small recovery room. Elijah lay there, connected to monitors, oxygen still in place, but his breathing was steady now. Not perfect, not strong, but no longer fading. Alive. Marcus leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped together. He hadn't moved much since they brought Elijah in. He was afraid if he did, something might change. But nothing did. Elijah's chest rose and fell. Steady. Marcus looked at him, really looked this time, not through fear, not through urgency, just as a son. After a while, Elijah's eyes opened. Slowly, Marcus straightened immediately. "Hey," he said, his voice softer than it had been all night. Elijah blinked a few times, adjusting to the light. Then he saw Marcus and smiled. Not weak, not fading, real. "You stayed," Elijah murmured. Marcus let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Yeah," he said, "I stayed." Elijah's gaze shifted slightly. Daniel stood near the doorway, still quiet, still composed. Elijah looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, carefully, he lifted his hand. Marcus helped guide it. Elijah reached toward Daniel. Daniel stepped closer without hesitation. Elijah's fingers wrapped weakly around his hand. "You," Elijah said, his voice rough, but clear enough. "You saved more than my life." Daniel didn't answer immediately. He just held the old man's hand. Then he nodded once. That was enough. In the days that followed, the hospital began to change, not loudly, not all at once, but unmistakably. Meetings were called, policies reviewed, and for the first time in a long time, questions were asked. Not about liability, not about cost, but about responsibility. Daniel sat at the head of a conference table one morning, his posture the same as always, calm, precise. Michael Reynolds sat to his right, documents spread neatly in front of him. Across the table, department heads listened, some tense, some uncertain. "All emergency cases are to be treated immediately," Daniel said, "no exceptions based on insurance status." No one interrupted. "Second," he continued, "we establish a patient support fund, immediate access for those without financial means." Michael nodded. "Already drafting the framework." "Good." Daniel's eyes moved across the room. And third, mandatory ethics retraining for all medical staff. Karen shifted slightly in her seat. Claire didn't look up. Lily, sitting at the far end, listened carefully. Her expression different now. Stronger. She had changed too, because sometimes witnessing something is enough to reshape who you become. Weeks later, Marcus stood in the same building, but not in the same place. He wore clean clothes now, simple, but new. A badge hung from his shirt. Patient Support Assistant. He looked down at it for a moment, still not fully used to the idea. Daniel had offered him the position himself. "You know what it feels like," Daniel had said. "That matters more than anything else." Marcus hadn't known what to say, so he had said yes. Now he stood at the reception desk on the other side, and when a man walked in, tired, worried, holding on to someone he loved. Marcus didn't ask for insurance first. He said, "Let's get you help." Lily moved through the hospital corridors with more confidence now. Still gentle, still kind, but no longer silent. She had chosen this path for a reason, and now she understood it more clearly than ever. Years later, she would become the kind of doctor who didn't hesitate, the kind who stepped forward. And outside, the rain had finally stopped. The sky opened slowly, sunlight breaking through clouds that had held the city in gray for too long. Marcus walked beside Elijah along a quiet sidewalk. No rush, no fear. Elijah leaned slightly on a cane now, his steps slow but steady. Marcus matched his pace. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to, because for the first time in years, they weren't trying to survive the moment. They were simply living it, and the air felt easier to breathe. At the end of this story, what stays with us is not just what happened inside that hospital, but what it reveals about the world we live in every day. Injustice still exists. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it hides behind rules, procedures, or polite words. But it is real, and the truth is, systems do not change on their own. It only takes one person at the right moment to stand up and say, "This is not right." That one voice can shift everything. Kindness does not always come with recognition. It is not always loud or celebrated. Sometimes it is a decision made in silence. Sometimes it is simply choosing to care when others turn away. But even the smallest act of humanity can save a life or change the direction of someone's future. And hope does not always arrive the way we expect. It does not always come from power or status. Sometimes it comes from someone who understands pain, someone who has been there before, someone who refuses to let the same story repeat again. In our daily lives, we may not face moments as dramatic as this, but we all face choices: to ignore or to notice, to judge or to understand, to follow what is easy or to do what is right. The way we treat others, especially those who seem invisible, defines who we truly are. So take a moment today to ask yourself, if someone needed help, would I step forward or look away? If something felt wrong, would I stay silent or speak up? If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from and what you would have done in that moment. And if you believe that kindness and courage still matter in this world, take a second to support the channel and stay with us for more stories like this. May God bless you and your family. May He give you strength to stand for what is right and a heart that never turns away from those in need. If you believe in that message, type Amen in the comments.